mold systems in there that when they drain, they are draining to the storm drainage that ultimately goes down to the river, because that's the way we were told to do it 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years ago. If you have a plant that's not running efficiently, you have a plant that's wasting BTUs. Looking at all the energy distribution systems, we're looking at the distribution systems not only within the campus boundary from an energy perspective, but also outside. With our plans to increase our gas utilization for thermal, we now need to look at how we get gas to the campus to do that. The existing system won't do that. How can we do this in a way that benefits the community? Now you start getting involved with PUCO regulations and things like that if we want to share versus own versus have Columbia or somebody build this line for us and just put it in our rate. Interesting questions, we'll work them through, but this is the kind of magnitude that we're looking at. You talk about even wheeling power into the Athens area from a nearby southeast Ohio county. We have a weak distribution system coming in. The campus right now is on the tertiary winding of the local transformer, which means if there's a hiccup on Court Street, we feel it on campus. We want to get away from that. And we also want diversity of source. So one of our objectives is to get power coming into this area, and in particular for Ohio University, from diverse sources. High tension power, 138 kV power. What's good for us will be good for the community, because now the infrastructure is going to be here. We're talking to the AEP about that right now. What that does, it sets up the infrastructure so that if we want to wheel wind energy in, if we want to wheel hydro, if we want to wheel power in from a proposed solar farm up in Nobles County, we have the infrastructure to get it here. Building HVAC systems, building controls, opportunities there, particularly around not using it in the first place. We have very poor metering right now by metering and measuring the energy that we're using, so we'll be working on that initiative over the next year and a half. That also helps us highlight who our energy hogs are, no behaviors on campus that result in energy patterns, and it gives us an opportunity to try to manage our portfolio of energy use. We have our, by communication, I'm not talking just about outreach events like this, but rather how the buildings talk to the mothership, how we talk to the buildings, how the controls and systems interact so that we can manage them efficiently. I've mentioned business continuity goals. You know, the derecho was a big deal here. You mentioned coming within 3 hours of running out of water in Ames. Campus was only down for 13 hours in the derecho. I was not here at the time, but certainly we had been driving a lot of the thought. We can afford to be down for a little bit, so we want to make sure we've identified critical loads on campus so that we can get power to those loads quickly and easily. We are really looking seriously at alternative energy sources. What's the viability for them in the context of our demands? Lastly, at solar.lally.com, solar hydronic heating system I put in our house in Ithaca, cost about $31,000, but after tax it was about $19,000. I figure it'll pay for itself in 17 or 18 years, but it does save me 43% on my fuel. To me, the mild winters are out here are a great thing. And I'd say one of the other challenges as we poke around is, for example, look at geothermal. Given our location and where we are, you look at a parking lot, you look at a soccer field. You know, if you go to Ball State, they're putting their fields underneath there. Those are all future building sites from a facilities perspective. But we also have the additional challenge in this area of the well field protection. It's not if the boreholes and the pipes in them are going to leak, it's just when they do. And we're not trying to swallow the elephant whole. We're trying to chunk the problem into digestible bites and work on this in a multi-pronged approach. What's paid for the trip today is to be able to be at the same table with Chris and Roger now, because I've been trying to reach these guys for several months. What impact can we help in the community in laying in the infrastructure so that some of these things are possible?
What is a hydronic heating system?
Hot water baseboard is a fancy name for it. There are collectors on the top of the roof that go down into a 400-gallon tank in my basement. Actually, a controller of this system is actually bigger than we have in most of the buildings in Ohio. But it makes decisions. So first of all, is the difference in temperature between the top of the solar array warm enough to make it worthwhile turning the system on. Oh, by the way, if it starts getting too hot in summer, we have a heat dump out in the woods to just essentially, it's a fan coil. You're running in the reverse direction without the heat. So it makes decisions like that. I will also say that in many years past, Rodale Press have a publication. They do organic gardening. Passive solar hot water system works pretty well. I have one of those. Saved me about 15% a year. I had to turn it off for the winter because it freeze up. So the other thing that I have running through that tank is the line that goes from the well to the hot water boiler, if you will, so it preheats the water. There's actually not a lot of water in my system that's on the roof. It's mostly the glass tubes.
We might be burning gas to decrease our CO2 levels or make it cleaner from coal, but when we're actually extracting the gas, that's when we have huge methane and CO2 problems. If our ultimate goal is decreasing our CO2, that's not really a solution, burning gas.
I recognize that. It's an intermediate step, but we have a real deadline that does not lock us into burning gas in the long run.
When OU is making these plans, we haven't, in the past years I've been at OU, a conservation plan for students and for the workers. So if we had that in place, I believe that we could probably knock off about 30% of our energy use, but I don't see that happening, really on a strategic scale amongst OU at all. And I work there and I spend a lot of time there. So just your thoughts on that?
Well, I'll accept your observation because it's real. I will also say that in the reorganization I did in January, the Office of Sustainability now reports directly to me, and we're trying to engage Seoul and others, provide opportunities for what I see as a learning and living lab on, among other things, what can happen around energy. And it's a very practical application. I'm going to try to make progress in an area.
As a member of BORC, we've worked really hard this last 2.5 years. I'm a member of the Bill of Rights Committee, and one of our objectives for the last over 2 years has been to collect door-to-door signatures. We collected signatures to get this initiative for saving our water and so forth on the ballot this fall. We were successful in doing that. It was almost 800 signatures, which is about half of the voting population of the city of Athens, not including very many of the students of Ohio University. You've talked about the Master Comprehensive Plan for OU. There is so much new building going on at OU. I came here in 1963. I see a lot of these old buildings being torn down. I see all this new building. And I'm wondering, in this Master Comprehensive Plan, of looking at what kind of energy you're going to use in those buildings. We have such wonderful, we have Mr. Beal here who developed the Stirling engine. I mean, there's so many great resources that are available to those contractors with whom you are working to build these buildings. And I'm wondering, some of that, other kinds of technology are going to be employed in that new construction. When you're talking about the ridges, when we went door to door, people would say to me, well, where on earth would they frack in the city of Athens? Or where would they put injection wells in the city of Athens? And I had to remind them that all that land up at the ridges is owned by the university. We've had little or no response from the university and our questions about this particularly large piece of land inside the city. Is that any kind of fracking or injection wells or gas from that source a part of that plan?
To my knowledge, no, it is not. The university is not allowing any fracking drilling on the campus right now. We do have a lot of activity around the eastern campus that is going on, and we've been advised that we should do some test holes to make sure that we set a baseline for the existing condition so that if we believe there's contamination on the eastern campus as a result of the fracking going on in surrounding areas, we will be able to point to that baseline. But I'm not aware of any intention at the moment to do anything like that up in the river.
What sort of heating and cooling philosophy is being employed in some of these new buildings?
Managing these buildings wisely, insulated. One of the things we perhaps need to look at is whether district energy in the long run is the answer for providing cooling and heat of the buildings. One of the objectives of the utility master plan is to help us set the standard. As a district energy shop right now, part of the utility master plan is to go out and ask those questions.
Northwest Ohio is a leader in renewable energy, and Southeast Ohio is a leader. If Ohio University is paying attention to schools like Toledo University or Bowling Green University and how they are using their local renewable energy to create the sustainable future that my generation wants. When you say that your master plan is for 2075, you will be gone by then. I will be an old woman by then. And so that is not a master plan that actually addresses the issues of today. So I'm wondering what you're doing to utilize the 4 solar and wind companies here in Athens County and the geothermal business that is also here in Athens County. If we are going to be a leader, then we should lead.
Our intent is not to kick the can down the road for you to deal with it. We're working on a short-term, an intermediate, and a longer-term plan. The size of our needs right now, there is no physical plant that can provide them in Southeast Ohio today. And as we get ready to present loads to providers of energy and essentially get to the point where we're willing to make the commitment so they're willing to build, because at the end of the day they have to pay their bills too. Another constraint here is that I'm doing this under the pressure that every nickel I add to a kilowatt hour in cost ultimately results in somebody's tuition bill. We have not been in a position to go to market for our energy needs. I believe our gas contract is up in January. We're going to be working on that. Our electric commodity contract is up in May. I have not been to Bowling Green, but I will tell you, for example, Stanford has gone all electric, where they have a lot of cheap electric, among other things, and a lot of sun. I and a group of students from the Sierra Club at Ohio went to GeoCon 2 at Ball State last spring. What are the good parts of that system, what aren't? So we're not in a mode to make any action right now, but yes, we're looking around.
Would it make sense for the university to join the aggregation that's going on? You could throw in numbers that would make this area really attractive to some providers.
I don't know the answer to that, but we'll certainly ask the question. Yes, Paul?
Just to shift the point across there, I'd like Rod to speak a little bit about the Council of Governments we're trying to put together, as well as what other villages are on the ballot for November. And I say that just because we have a county-wide representation here, so the more they know about it, the better they can do. On the other hand, for Chris, I want to know a little bit more about the MRF, and are you talking to the Zero Waste people at Rural Action?
As was mentioned earlier, we have been communicating a lot with NOPEC, this well-established large aggregator in northeast Ohio. And we learned that they used a council of governments to create NOPEC. We are in the process of creating a similar council of governments for SOPEC. That will allow us to much more easily bring in Amesville, which has already passed their ballot measure, and Jacksonville and Trimble and Buckville that have it on the next ballot as we gain experience and expand, that we can invite surrounding counties to truly create a regional Southeast Ohio Energy Council here.
I'm going to try talking about it at the committee meeting next Monday, so they've heard it once now. So it's not totally foreign, okay? So that I have an agenda.
In upstate New York, when I was on the legislature board for Tompkins County, an operation called MEGA was in its infancy, Municipal Electric and Gas Alliance, which was to aggregate within Tompkins County electric and gas purchases. Here it is 13 or 14 years later. It's in operation in 48 of the 52 counties in New York State, and it saves people money.
And that's it. We need to organize. Down here, we're not organized. Whether it's in jobs, for Jobs Ohio, they have an organization, APEG right now, Appalachian Partnership for Economic Growth. We are just not, you see that little cartoon there's always there where the bunch of little fish eat the big fish because they're organized. And that's really what we have to do, both in energy, both in jobs, and everything else we do. Because we're just not together yet. And
we are working with Rural Action. They're part of our team that's helping us plan our MRF. The MRF is a materials recovery facility, not sorting out your cardboard, your glass, and cans. You just put it in one big container. And we actually are already doing this on a small scale. We call it the mini MRF. We were having volunteers from SEPTA. Now we've actually hired a few folks from SEPTA. And this is giving them an opportunity to get a job. And so when they get out of jail, they can get a reference. So we feel pretty good about that. We are doing it on a small scale now, and we're really close to being able to tell everybody that we're now accepting all the plastics.
City of Belpre, both electric and gas, Village of Albany. When you say that we haven't done anything in Southeast Ohio, that's not necessarily true. In 2009, the City of Athens passed the gas aggregation, and nothing, has taken place, and I tried to object. Volunteer Energy has, probably right now, we've got between 45 and 50 communities across the state of Ohio, both in gas and electric aggregation. So we've had an extensive amount of experience in this area. And it's a good program, and I applaud your efforts on it. And also Marietta have an aggregation program that they've had for several years. So it has been around for a long time. You go all the way over to Bridgeport, Fredericktown, we're all across the state of Ohio. I applaud your efforts, but there have been efforts in Southeast Ohio.
If you go to the PUCO website, you'll see that there's a lot of open ground. There are little pockets here and there, but there's a lot of vast territories of unaggregated.
Yeah, when you talk about natural gas, though, you have to understand that the only communities that have it. In Southeast Ohio, there's an awful lot of areas that have propane.
There's about 6 kilowatts of heat going on in this room right now. Every one of you people sitting there doing absolutely nothing is a high-watt light bulb. Okay? Those 2 doors have behind them a heat pump. Those doors are shut. We are in here getting hotter and hotter, and if you open those 2 doors, a little fan get cool. This ain't complicated. Lots and lots of people all over the world have done it. I did it in my own house. I went totally off all fossil fuels, and I just bought some PV. The PV guys will know I bought too much. Too much is way better than too little. And I'm not only running my house and my car. Every day I'm giving about 30 kilowatt hours back to the grid. And this was not a huge burden. The problem is getting the word out.
Folks can set up the lunch without too much noise and disturbing you.
I'm Charlotte, this is Elise, and we've done your lunch for today. We live at Far Valley Farm, it's about 2 miles down the road this way. And we've grown almost all the ingredients in your lunch. There's little tags that will show you what was store-bought and what was homegrown. Almost 100% organic. Far Valley Farm, it's an 1880s farmhouse that we've restored, and it's now available for parties or out-of-town guests, weddings, whatnot.
Renewable energy credit, and Gary locked in for a 5-year contract at 25 cents instead of going...
and that was about $400 a megawatt we were paid every year.
And so you got $400 a megawatt?
Well, it's $382 or something.
Or per year, because a megawatt's 1,000 kilowatt hours.
Yeah.
But anyway, you could have got on the spot market and taken a higher rate, but then when the SREX would drop drastically, you would be getting not very much at all for them right now.
Yeah, when you show them acre, the difference in what we're getting renewable energy credits there.
Yeah, those modules, for the time, they were the most efficient on the market, but now other modules are catching up, and some are maybe even better. That allowed us to put that array on that small roof space and just hide it in the lines of this beautiful old Victorian house.
Yeah.
So you don't even notice it's on there.
You hardly see it. Yeah.
Sure, is there solar water here?
No.
I know this is Ann Bauner's, it was Ann Bauner's house, and it got flooded.
It would have been too costly to fence it all off. Well, I live in the plains, and my main lot's only like 0.816 acres.
Help. String beans.
One day. My kids out here all the time. Bit of our stomping ground.
And it's less than a kilowatt. It's got 4 235 watt modules, but the electric usage in this building is remarkably low, and if it stays similar to what it was last year, this will take care of 75% of the power the building needs.
Wow.
And everything.
Way to get your energy.
Inverters that drive on acre. That's kind of what we have. Ours is sort of.
Right, yeah. You probably have a Xantrex or something?
The Xantrex.
So, I don't know, we're all fitting in here from.
With difficulty, no doubt.
Have to get a marriage license or something. And this is this red box here. And this is where the majority of the solar power comes down. And right now we're making 1,179 watts. And it's just basically feeding the power straight back into the grid. And that's what it does most of the time. This just feeds the grid. but we're also connected to a battery system.
So when you say connected battery system, you have a standalone system?
Yeah, actually what happens here is that this is a grid tie only inverter. It feeds the grid all day long unless the power goes down. Then it can feed those two inverters over there through a transfer switch. Now what it does essentially is it backfeeds them. See, we have this transfer switch here, and if I flick that switch, that puts the house on battery power.
Does it switch itself, or you have to come down to it?
Well, it would do it automatically, but it does take power to keep those two inverters on all the time. So I just come down and do it. This exact same system, often we'll set them up automatically. There's some advantages to that because that maintains the batteries as well. 120 volt inverter, and the two of them give you 120, 240, so that gives you your regular house current. And we got about, these two inverters give about 7,000 watts total. And plus, if that one's cranking, that can give us another up to 2,000 watts, so we can get 9,000 watts. We have a lot of power here for power out here.
$3 a month.
That's wonderful. That's amazing.
I mean, 3 to 5, it's hard to say.
Telling people that story. It's like, listen people, what's your electric bill? Oh, a couple $100 a month, you know? What's yours, Drake? $3.
Yeah, we don't have
Okay, does this make sense or not? You tell me.
Do you have electric hot water or no?
No, we pump about 300 kilowatt hours back into the grid per year more than we use. So we're right on the line for them to tell us, calm down a little bit here.
But if you came needy of a new hot water tank,
that would take it no problem.
That would take it.
And then a lot, I mean, we'd have to put up more modules. But we also have like sealed batteries here now, which is something we just got. These are called full river batteries. When we got these and got rid of the liquid acid batteries, we took the door off and turned off the battery vent fan because these are maintenance free, and unless there's some kind of a problem, they're not gonna give off any gas at all. If they do give off gas, you'll smell them and you'll know you got a problem. It smells like rotten eggs. We don't have to use this anymore. This is going to be moved out of here shortly.
Distilled water.
And we don't need to use the refractometer either, which is an advanced tool for checking your battery-specific gravity.
Or the sugar of your fruit.
So
he's got one for sale cheap here, Yeah, there you go. They come in handy.
Yeah, I have a feeling I'll be using it on some other systems. Tightened up the house everywhere. There were a lot of air leaks, especially the basement. The basement was a huge air leak. Put this insulation up around the basement here, this foam board insulation. The walls are like ceramic block, and air was just blowing through. Put in a new cellar door. The old cellar door was, wouldn't quite close. In fact, the pipes used to freeze in the basement.
And they don't anymore.
No, it stays nice and toasty down.
So there's not too many bad things about solar. The more fossil fuels get burned, that ticks us up over the tipping point of no return. There's 2,795 gigatons of carbon in the ground identified and owned by these big fossil fuel corporations. We can't let them burn all this. In fact, we need to start yesterday. We're behind.
What did I miss, Jeff?
Matt was a great guy, and he's going to tell you the history of solar.
This is really the reality of where our energy comes from right now. Dovetail, been around since 1995, but we really refocused on solar and wind in 2003 and stopped building houses. Installed about 9 megawatts so far, Ohio and surrounding states, focus on quality and long-lasting systems.
That's a great slide.
The kind of electricity that's in your flashlight battery, right? So we have to have inverters to convert that to AC or alternating current, which is what we use in our house. Along with that, the inverter synchronizes that AC waveform with the AC waveform that's coming off the grid, so you can actually feed right into the system. You don't need to have a separate electrical system. That device wasn't really available until about the late 80s, 90s to do that. So that's what really made solar available to the masses. The beautiful thing about solar is that it's non-mechanical. There are no moving parts. There's very little to go wrong, and you should expect 30 to 50 years. The standard base equipment is what we call crystalline solar module. Silicon is by far the most accepted material. It's non-toxic, plentiful, and that's what almost all our solar panels are made from. The efficiency ranges from 15 to 21%, and that relates to how much of the energy striking that panel is actually converted into electricity. And most of the panels are coming with about a 25-year warranty. The costs have gone down. We're reaching a pretty stable price point. Just wanted to mention that we are partnered with the Ohio Sierra Club, and if you are a member of the Sierra Club, or even say you're a friend of the Sierra Club, we will send a donation to them when we put a system on your house. So these are just a variety. You'll see these are solar shingles, which are really not available anymore. It's a great idea, but just very expensive, and it's not a real practical solution. Solar is here. There's no reason not to use it. The technology is proven, it's reliable, efficiencies are good, it's available, prices are stable, and now the key really is the financing options. We have the federal tax credit that's through the end of 2015, and we have the interest and the desirability in the business and the consumer world. To give you a sense of what has happened over the last 10, 15 years, the same size panels, we were excited when that became a 200-watt panel in 2005. But it's 200 watts? Wow. Okay, that same size panel is now 280 watts. So the efficiency has improved. Very nice for people who have limited roof space or have shade that they're trying to avoid without cutting down trees. The inverter efficiencies have also gone up tremendously as well. The module cost has gone down exponentially. We used to pay $5 a watt for wholesale. Now we're paying 85 cents to $1 a watt. The price has dropped that much in 9 years. And the installed system cost has gone down accordingly. And here's a graphical today. Tax credits, we've already kind of talked about that. If you're a commercial business, you get an additional tax credit in the form of an accelerated depreciation cycle schedule. You can depreciate the entire amount of that system over 5 years instead of over the whole lifetime. Significant additional tax credit on top of the investment tax credit of 30%. We always encourage people to, residential customers especially, finance their system. And EPA type arrangements aren't really being used on the residential level much in the Midwest. However, they are used a lot on the West Coast and the East Coast. And that is something that I think has questionable motivations. I mean, the people who are doing that are making huge amounts of money because they have turned solar into a commodity to be bought and sold just like natural gas or fossil fuel electricity.
Yeah, along with PPAs on residential, it's also a lease or a solar lease.
Right. And so it would be called a lease.
So they're starting to see articles about solar fleecing. Because really, on a residential scale, people are better off owning it or financing it through a loan, but not necessarily enriching some corporation.
They are owning that system, so they're getting the tax credit, and they're getting the depreciation for putting the system on your roof, and then they're selling you the electricity from it. Well, I agree that a PPA is a great option for municipalities, nonprofits, educational institutions that can't use tax credits and don't have the ability to finance the system themselves over a long enough term. I would not recommend it for residential customers or for-profit institutions. There are leases that can be set up more to result in ownership and not to result in a permanent power purchase agreement relationship. So those leases can be beneficial, and they're really more another form of bank financing. The last category, community solar schools or community gardens, is a very exciting development. It is a little tricky to do in Ohio due to the net metering laws and so on, but that is something that we will find a way to make that happen. Again, just a rundown of different types of direct purchase, the lease, versus a power purchase agreement. If you're a business, you might be offered, these different options. The system purchase would be the most favorable to you in the long run if you have the financing to do it. The operating lease is kind of an in-between option, which might be helpful. The power purchase agreement, like we said, really reserved for people who can't use the tax credits or have financing long enough term to afford that system. Residential financing. And that's really the key to getting solar on your roof. In the past, it has been difficult because the banks were not used to lending money for solar systems, and they were not comfortable doing that. Recently, well, a few years ago, the state came out with something called the EcoLink program. The state will come in and buy down the interest rate by 3%. We work with KeyBank. If you qualify for a secured loan with KeyBank, the normal rate would be 4.5%, 5%. So that becomes 1.5% to 2% interest rate. And over 5 to 7 years, you will pay a little bit more on your loan than you would have paid for that electricity, because the payback period is a little longer than that. However, that delta is relatively small, and most people, will choose to make that investment in their solar system. What we're finding as the EcoLink program winds down, because they will run out of money at some point, KeyBank and hopefully other banks are saying, you know what, we can be more flexible. We're going to start offering competitive rates for whatever term you want, so that you can hit that point where your monthly payment on your solar system is less than you would have been paying for that electricity. That's positive cash flow from day one. And that's what a lot of people are looking for and a lot of people need. That's why people are doing leases in California, right? Because they can't afford to invest in that system, and maybe they can't get a loan. We can offer them financing from day one that costs less than what they would have been paying on that electricity that's now being produced on their roof. There's no downside. It takes 12 years to pay off. It takes 15 years to pay off. So what? The next 12 or 15 years of free energy that you get at the rates that you would have been paying in 15 years, which are going to be a lot higher than now, make it all worthwhile. A good return on that investment. Probably better than you will get in the stock market. And at the same time, securing your own energy usage for the future. Can I get this system without having to spend more each month than I'm spending now? So that's the goal.
Why is EcoLink running out of money?
Because, we're lucky that EcoLink even exists at this point. The state government is not friendly to renewables. This is specifically for energy efficiency and renewables. It was money that was already in the hopper, and it's not coming, it's not getting renewed.
Part of the EcoLink's program is that the bank gets 5 they wish, and pay that back, and they won't even disclose what the low interest rate is.
Okay, so I wasn't even aware of that. So they sweeten the pot for the banks. Kind of a typical system that we're putting now, about 6 kW, about 6,000 watts. This is what you can see over 1 year, over 25 years, the avoided tons of CO2. We're talking 178,000 tons of CO2, okay? The equivalent of 26 passenger vehicles. And this is only the first 25 years. Gallons of gas consumed. These are all the equivalent carbon. Now there's other issues, just to be fair here. Since our system doesn't operate at 100% efficiency, these coal plants are chugging away, meet a peak demand, and that peak demand is not always happening. So there's a lot of energy being produced and pumped into the grid that never really gets used. And that's a huge issue that is not really addressed. I know there's some people who are kind of interested in how the process works. It's just a quick profile. Sierra Club member comes and says, hey, I want to do solar in my house, how much can you fit? We give them a little sketch like this. They have a couple of sky-like solar tubes, got to work around those. A month or two later, that's what's on the roof. This is the site map that we now prepare for residential systems, whether it's permitted or not. And since part of the theme here was the evolution of solar, that's our electrical diagram now. That's what it looked like. I just love the color coding. This is Word. This is Word. Microsoft Word right here. We use SketchUp in layout programs now. This is actually the array that went with that. Most of the rest of this is kind of a little historical journey through our systems that we've installed, starting with the first house we built for my mom in 1996. This was a solar and a wind hybrid, which you can't see the wind, passive solar house, solar PV and wind. Anybody recognize this guy? What county commissioner? Anybody identify?
How many of your county commissioners have installed solar for 2 years?
This is a project that Dovetail and Third collaborated on, and Chris was a temporary employee. This is one of our early school systems, first school system we did up in the Cleveland area. This is Sweat Hollow. And I knew this would happen, that somebody would be here today who would install a system for that I didn't have a picture of. And that winner is John Powell. Right now. Sorry, John. I apologize. I couldn't find all the pictures I wanted. This is in Athens, our first big system, the Cincinnati Zoo. That's 20 kW. Nowadays, that 20 kW system would be a third of that size. Those panels were 105 watts each. Now they're 280. The Link, 3 systems we did there, and now they're in the solar business themselves and do megawatt systems on their own. Local fellows, some people will recognize, Gary Easton and Glenn Watkins. Gary's got his own solar company now. So here's a hybrid, solar PV and solar thermal. I like the shape of this because she had one little wedge of south-facing roof in the middle of her whole house. So we extended, it's like an airplane wing, rail and port. So the first phase of the OU composting facility in 2008, AP first solar array. School system, again, this is big, 15 kW back then. We're like, wow, that's a big system. Some people will recognize this. And I have to give great credit because he's really the first solar installer I ever met when I lived at Far Valley Farms 20 years ago. Greg was an inspiration, and then when he came back from Colorado, we put him to work for a company. Greg and I taught a number of installation training classes at Hockham College, including a little system on the Nature Center. Back in the old days, we used to just stick the L-foot with some caulking right on top of the shingle, but nowadays we have nice flash blocks. You don't have to worry about any leakage in the long run. We work through the winter when we can. We're familiar with the community center. Really wonderful project. That was a PPA. That's actually owned by a company called Solar Vision. Carol Bentz, Net Zero Energy Home. We did 3 different, and this is a zero net energy school, just south of Cincinnati in northern Kentucky. It's a local project, Larry Conrad, that's Don Linder's. EcoFoot. These mounting feet are made by a company based here in Athens called Ecolibri, but they have a successful business making plastic mounting system, which we were a little skeptical of at first, I have to admit, and they came to us and we said, here's our list of reasons why we don't like your idea. And they addressed pretty much all of them to the point where we were comfortable enough to use the product. It's a distillery, off-grid warehouse, and very creatively used the tow motor, the forklift battery bank, as the battery for the system. So it's all fine unless he wants to use his forklift at night. So you PAL next, and this has got to be one of my top iconic, ironic solar arrays. This is on the coal shed at Malshi.
Yeah. The seed there with that little 2 kW strip.
That's right. That's right. So this was hilarious and wonderful.
How big is that system right there?
It's about 70 or 75 kW. You can just see it if you're driving by the track on Schaefer. Look over and you'll see the profiles of this on the shed there. Another PPA, small system at Mayfield Village Police. This is really probably my favorite carport that we have done just because of the elegance of the art. Believe it or not, that McDonald's exports energy all day long. Not because it has solar, but because it is so efficient. And this is what we're doing nowadays. We're doing these megawatt arrays over in Indiana for the Indiana Municipal Power Authority. They plan to do 100 more 1 megawatt, 1.2 megawatt arrays. This one's on single axis tractors, so they rotate east and west.
Matt, you'll just continue to go to all the states around us.
Well, I mean, aggregation is coming, right? But we don't know what the process is going to be for this big array that's supposed to go in Athens, and I'm not so sure that it's going to be open process. I hope it is. I hope we have a chance to bid on it, but you'll have to talk to Chris and Roger about that. This is one we just finished, the Buckeye Polaco. Notice they're black panels. They would not let us put blue panels. My son Olin had just got accepted. He was able to work on that. It's his first project with us. So he worked on that system for 3 weeks before he started school up there. Renewable energy credits, which I know people want to talk about. So just to be clear on what happened with this Senate bill that rolled back and froze the renewable energy portfolio standards. The beans that we use to count how much renewable energy goes on the grid are called solar renewable energy credits, or SRECs. They're commodities that represent clean energy going on the grid. It has nothing to do with the actual electrons. You still get to keep your electrons even if you sell the renewable energy credits. It's a method of accounting. You also get to say you are responsible for putting that solar renewable energy onto the grid. There's different ways to sell it. There used to be long-term contracts. They've lost a tremendous amount of value, especially since the action by the legislature. Right now they're at about $20 for a 5-year contract. No, it used to be 10 times that a year ago. We saw it going down gradually, which we expected. Now it's just plummeted. Okay, this is about the Senate Bill 310. It was 25% advanced energy. Pretty quickly stopped calling that renewable energy because a lot of the advanced energy had nothing to do with renewables. It could be clean coal, they said, new generation nuclear. So it's really 12.5% was the target by 2025, renewable energy for the investor-owned utilities in Ohio. That doesn't cover the rural co-ops, it doesn't cover the munis. The main effect of Senate Bill 310 was to freeze the requirements at the current level in 2014. So this was wrong, backwards in every way you can imagine. There was really no justification for it. The original law that was created, real boon to the state's economy, has created a lot of jobs, it has saved a lot of energy because of the whole energy efficiency component. This is the solar portion. Within the 12.5%, there's a carve-out for solar. We were surprised, to be honest with you, that even got in the bill. I remember testifying and saying we should be a 5% carve-out for solar, and they said, you can't, how are you going to pay for this? This was during the first Gulf War. We just took some of the resources we were putting into the war in the Gulf. They gave us 1/2%
And that solar carve-out was pushed in by John Houston, a Republican. It was a bipartisan, unanimous, good for everybody, good for Ohio bill. And now what's happened was 2 rich billionaire libertarians in Kansas who happen to own coal companies told Ohio what to do. Anytime a bill passes at 1 in the morning, it's probably bad. And the polling shows that most of us, all disagreed with it. And the legislators in Ohio said, F you to the polls and to the people, and said yes to corporate financing of politics.
So 1/2% is just too much. And we've got to freeze it right here at 0.12%.
Freeze it while we basically get rid of it.
Right.
And freeze it's just a strategy. The goal is to throw it out.
The reason why it's had such a big effect on the renewable energy credit markets is because these renewable energy credits now are often sold in multiple year contracts. So it's not like next year we all can go out and sell our credits again because they've already been sold, which means that the utilities already have what they need for many years going forward. Okay, some of those older contracts are expiring, or some of them are doing it on the spot market. But it's very detrimental to the SREC market, which was a big part of kind of the boom of the solar market in Ohio, which was really kicking in around 2010. The price of solar went down, so that moderated some, but last year was a very slow year. Most of the solar companies did a lot less business than they had done in the past. We're starting to see a resurgence, but it's generally in these bigger projects, and we're turning into installers instead of turnkey system providers, which means it's much more difficult to cover our overhead and so on because we're not selling the equipment anymore. We're just being brought in to install these big systems. Somebody else is providing the equipment. So it's very challenging. We focused on residential and small commercial at the same time as getting into the utility scale stuff. So we have one crew over in Indiana installing big megawatt farms. We have another crew running around Ohio serving folks like yourselves. Financing and paying for the system. And for a small residential system, yeah, let's take a deep breath and realize, agreed, it's not the end of the world. You can still put solar in your house. Do it anyway. You look at the economy as a whole, the solar economy. When you get into bigger systems, the sale of the renewable energy credits was a key component of the financing of those systems. And it allowed people to put in systems that they otherwise couldn't afford.
Solar on your system, on your house, you would do lots of great things for the earth. Financially, you would not purchase energy from the utility at maybe 7 to 10 cents, maybe let's call it 8 cents a kilowatt hour. In addition to that 8 cents of savings, you would get 4 cents of income from your SRECs a couple years ago. And that's now been cut to maybe 2 cents. So that's been an adjustment. Commercial electricity rates are more like 4 or 5 or 6 cents. And so 5 cents for electric savings, 4 cents for SRECs, that's almost half of the financial benefits that are attacked. And it's not just because it's down to 2 cents now, it's down to 2 cents with a big question mark. And they're saying, well, what's it going to be for over the next 10 years? We used to have a law in place that was told us it's around, you can do long-term planning and think about it. The attack on RPS is just, Ohio's the first domino that they want to follow. There's a renewable portfolio standard in an SREC market in 26 states. And these guys don't like it. So it's a fight.
Totally political. Larry Hagman,
JR.
he's got solar. If JR's got solar, everybody does.
In addition to the freeze on the benchmarks, there were some permanent law changes as well in that bill that are going to make it much more difficult, particularly for utility scale wind projects, which were a bigger deal in Northwest Ohio than they are here. Even if it goes the way they say it will, and after 2 years the benchmarks kick back in and the freeze is lifted, there still are things in place as a result of this bill that are going to make it harder. It was so bipartisan. I remember in 2008, looking at like the political rhetoric that was out there, and every candidate, you know, both parties were talking about how we need all these energy technologies, we need a diverse supply of energy for security, and you know, all of this, and then all of a sudden they decided to create that whole war on coal narrative as a wedge that was effective. It's become intensely partisan. It's going to be a long fight in Ohio to get back to a place where we can start moving things in the right direction.
I've been waiting for this moment to say I voted against 310. But I was up at 1 in the morning during that debate. We actually did a good job. Senator Seitz was the initial sponsor of Senate Bill 58, which was a circus, no offense to the animals. It was a zoo. A lot of the folks in his party were pushing back. Senator Haidt, who has wind farms, Senator LaRose from Akron, and we sort of had them tied up on this fight under Senate Bill 58, which didn't dismantle the RPS directly, but it did 1,000 cuts. But they also had a provision in there that would have allowed the utilities to grab millions off of ratepayers called shared savings, and we really hammered them on that issue. So I wanted to keep it there. We tied them up for months. I was the ranking Democrat on the Public Utilities Committee during that period. And then they made this transition to Senator Balderson, put this freeze in place. But as Debbie said, the irony of this is Governor Kasich had energy put a throw in his face during the debate. And then also we had several folks who had voted for this in the Senate, which was my argument on the floor. And you know, we're a state of the Wright brothers, the Edisons. I mean, this is a state that should be pushing innovation, technology, and instead we went backwards at 1:30, 2 o'clock in the morning. It's really unfortunate. We had energy efficiency portfolio to this as well that has saved customers millions, maybe billions of dollars. We don't know what the research says, you know, jobs that were created as a result of the renewable portfolio standards that were in place. It's really unfortunate, and frankly, I think just from an economic standpoint, bad for Ohio. We boast now to be the first state in the nation to effectively roll back the standard. It didn't make any sense, and what was telling to me was during that vote, we had 3 Republicans who were going to be up this election year essentially were told they could vote no against it. So that told me they knew they were doing the wrong thing. Many people on the other side of the aisle was disappointed. They flipped, they voted against their constituents' own interests. Debbie and I did everything we could, but the numbers just aren't there. So, but I appreciate you doing this, hosting this today. It's educational, and I think talk about this in the context of energy savings and jobs. Most Ohioans will understand that and recognize how far back Ohio went on that night. So appreciate the opportunity to be here. Thank you.
There's a lot of hope. So Matt's company is having to drive all the way to Indiana to do big projects. We're driving out of state to do big projects. But we're both doing more and more projects for residential people than we've ever done before. At least our company is, you guys too. We're doing it for so many reasons, including the economics. The economics, even with this attack on renewables, it still makes good financial sense. We'll find out that he wants it for the tech and she wants it for the pocketbook, or vice versa. Everybody's got their different reasons, but the economics work. This is the first year nationwide that residential solar has eclipsed all the other kinds of solar. Utility solar, those big huge farms, the big commercial stuff, that used to dominate. This year, residential is more powerful. There's more panels going in residential. Wouldn't you all go solar if solar right now were cheaper than coal-fired power plants? Who wouldn't, right? Everybody, even our cousin and Republican uncle that hates, that doesn't believe in global warming, he'd do it just because it makes financial sense. It's called grid parity. When solar is at parity or better than the grid. Well, guess what? It is. It's here today, right now. What he was talking about with financing, we have sold systems to customers that they took a home equity line out for 20 years. If they can finance it for 20 years, and maybe it might be 15 years for some people. But we've done projects where the system is a good roof. We can do a large system at a low cost, and they finance it because they've got good credit and a good home equity and loan. Their payments to pay off their solar are less than the offset cost of the status quo. So right now, today, in Ohio, solar is cheaper than coal. Take that message and share it with people. Put an asterisk on it, sometimes, not always. But there are cases where we can make that happen, and that's magic. That's amazing, and that gives me a lot of hope.
On the 30% tax credit, that's a federal tax credit, is that correct? Okay, so did somebody say earlier that that's only good for another year, perhaps?
Oh, by the way, hurry up.
Is that right?
Yeah, it's only in effect right now through 2015. We don't know what's going to happen after that.
Right.
Maybe renewed,
Right.
or we're expecting it would be reduced. It might end up being 10%. I don't know. Do you all hear anything, Debbie, politically on that? No, because that's a federal
issue.
That's a federal thing.
By law, it does go down to 10%. When it goes from 30, it drops down to 10%. What we're expecting is that if we're lucky, with crazy politics in DC, we can negotiate a long, steady sunset. That would probably be logical and appropriate. But it might be a
We're
sudden drop.
expecting it to be revisited.
I can't imagine Steiner's is gonna, you know, I think we gotta be talking Scott Wharton pretty loud.
Okay, and the other thing was then when you mentioned the EchoLink program, you said you didn't really know how much more funds or how much longer that would be available.
Our banks are telling us at least 6 months.
So again, do it quickly.
A number of banks are participating in that program.
We work with 6 banks. We prefer to go with the customer's bank if they know about it, and we'll help hold their hands. Some banks don't want to do paperwork, but Key Bank's one that we work with as well that knows about it.
But some people have a good relationship with their own bank, and the credit unions are pretty helpful.
The credit unions can't tap into the EcoLink.
Oh, okay.
Birds and solar panels are acting like mirrors, and is that because they're like these solar arrays that are too massive?
Well, let's start by saying I love birds, and I would like to kill less birds with electric energy systems. And to do that, let's shut down coal-fired power plants. They kill way more birds than wind generators or solar, but there are solar panel plants in the desert that are cool as anything, that have huge mirrors, make heat, completely different from the ones we're talking about, and they have fried some birds. In the grand scheme of things, those plants are less than 1% of all the solar we're talking about. This phenomenon does not apply to the solar panels that we're doing here in Ohio. Coal-fired power plants kill more birds than wind generators or coal.
That's actually a different technology called solar concentrators. And they're making heat by using mirrors.
Okay.
And it's very concentrated. Even the big utility scale arrays we're working on are not like that.
Airplanes kill birds. What the airports are doing is sending guys hiring guys with rifles to go out and shoot all the birds that are coming around the airport. We don't hear any protests.
You mentioned 350.org. I wondered if you could say anything about the climate rally march that's going to happen in 2 weekends.
Who's going to New York City with me? I don't have any rides for anybody. Marwan, it's a huge opportunity. Climate's fallen off of the radar, in my opinion, too much so. And so I believe that this is going to recharge a lot of folks. It's going to be maybe revisiting those days of 99%, 1%. It's going to be a peaceful rally. There's going to be grandmothers and churches there. It's going to be amazing. People from all over the world. It's coinciding with the United Nations climate intergovernmental something or other. But really what it's going to be, it's going to be a chance for the media to show lots and lots of people saying, we care about the environment, it's the #1 issue in our lifetime.
Windows and kids kill 10,000 times as many birds as the enormous solar power plants they're even talking about. It's a nonsense statement. The other thing is, do we want to have our grandkids live in hell? No. We don't have any choice, folks. We've got to get off coal. This is just a fact. I get kind of sick and tired of the arguments about money. This is not a problem of money. This is life and death. I'm not kidding. You read the IPCC, which is reported here. It says, you get off carbon, your grandkids are dead. Take your pick.
Somebody described to me that a lot of what's going on in our world are people bickering about whether or not they're going to sit in the front seat or the back seat of the car as it's going 1,000,000 miles an hour towards the edge of the cliff. We're all in this together, and we really should focus on where that car is going.
I want to thank Jeff and Matt for being here today.
I'm on the Rules Committee, and we've been hearing a bill about the Common Core state standards, about education standards. They're wanting to get Ohio out of these national standards, and they've included language in the bill that new standards in Ohio will include teaching the controversy on evolution and on climate science. When I asked the guy from the Boston think tank about what the good people at MIT would think about kids who had been taught junk science and whether they'd have a chance getting into MIT, the sponsor of the bill, Andy Thompson from Marietta, told me that what I needed to do to learn more about climate science was to read the book State of Fear by Michael Crichton. So that's the level of the debate at the State House.
Our governor candidate as a Democrat, where's, I mean, what's going on?
In what sense?
Well, I mean,
He's a hell of a lot better than Kasich. The question was about the gubernatorial race. Obviously, this is not a political event, so I'm just responding to the question, and as soon as Paul is set up with the presentation you came to see, I can stop. But I think the issue about the driver's license is a very unfortunate distraction. I think that Ed has done great things in Cuyahoga County, such as supporting universal access to preschool, starting savings accounts for every kid who enters kindergarten in Cuyahoga County, really forward-looking positive things that will help that county be stronger. That would be a much better kind of leadership for us here in Ohio than Governor Kasich, who signed Senate Bill 310, cut back access to women's health care, signed Senate Bill 5 to curtail workers' rights. We just got to keep the focus on the big picture issue as much as possible. Bye.